So we've seen in Victoria floods. I hope the people down there are all safe, and I trust that people are doing what they need to do to look after their property. But the reality is you've got massive floods in your neck of the woods.
But I don't know if I'm mistaken, but we do not have someone who was in a fairly high up position of influence in this country, maybe with the initials T.F. Flannery, telling us we're never going to have these sort of rains that fill up our dams, that we're going to have this catastrophic drought that's never going to really end. Like, is there any accountability at all for these catastrophists who gave us these desal plants that we paid billions for that we don't use? I mean, it just seems to be they can say anything, they can implement any sort of policy, no matter how destructive, no matter how costly, and when their predictions don't turn out, it's like, oh, well, let's move on to something else.
Probably the floods in Melbourne, you're right, are probably, interfering with the processes of the desal plant. Who knows? But there have always been floods to Victoria. I hate to tell you, there have always been floods in Victoria going back to early 1900s, 1970s, 1930s. We've got some photos we'll show you of the floods that took place. That I think these are in 1934. You've had floods throughout Melbourne. That's your newspaper there, or part of it, Rita.
I think
this is Melbourne back in the day. So, floods. Guess what, folks? Kiddies. It's not the first time it has happened.
But it's the first time it's happened probably in Adam Bandt's political career, because he was very keen to connect this flooding and, never waste a crisis. He was very keen to say, this is not normal, this is climate change. And people sent him these pictures and said, oh, wait a second, Adam.
The reality is Australia has always had floods, will always have droughts. And the really sad part of it, James, at the moment, is we're sitting here with all this water and we're not storing any of it. And we will be sitting on this show in a couple of years' time in the middle of a drought.
Yep.
And and they'll all be going, we need more desal plants, we need this, it's never going to rain again, yada, yada, yada. There is no long-term thinking in this country, James.
And yet at the same time, what do we keep doing? Well, we keep bringing more and more people in.
Yes.
So the other thing, too, is that, they're going to say, we keep, running down the dams even further and further every time, there's a drought. They're going to say, that's climate change. No, it's because you just added, 200,000 more people every single year to the population, which is what the business lobby and everybody else wants. We're just simply not thinking ahead. Here in New South Wales, we can't even get it done to raise the wall of the Warragamba Dam for more storage and also for more flood mitigation. And yet, here we are.
Yeah, but that's the Greens again. This is the Greens who have run so many of these bureaucracies, run a lot of the local councils, and they are dead set opposed to dams. They think dams are destructive, destroy the environment, and yet we have periods of drought where we have got, in a first world nation, people can't water their garden.
And yet, it's a
have to have a 5-minute shower.
But, the methane thing, the dams thing, all of this is a war on primary producers.
Yes, it is, 100%.
And this is a big thing that we're seeing around the world. We're seeing this in New Zealand. We're seeing this in the Netherlands. We've had Ralph Scholhammer on. We're seeing this around the world. And, a lot of it is, I think, that these Greens who make these policies are inner city types who, go and they buy the expensive organic food and they have no sort of connection to how, A, most people budget, and B, how the food is actually made. There have been many, many cases here in New South Wales where farmers have been wanting to build just small dams on their property to store water so that the next time the drought comes, their cattle can drink, they can have, water, and yet they encounter obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, and that's with a supposedly conservative government in New South Wales.
And this is really important, James. You raise this, and we should do a lot more on this. But the war on farmers, the war on the individual farmer, the mum and dad landowners out there who've got a holding and want to either have crops or cattle or whatever. There is a war. It has been directed against you. We're seeing it around the world. Where are the Nationals on this? We'll be speaking shortly to Matt Canavan. We might ask him about this. But the reality is, red tape, green tape, these methane might be a pledge to have a target or whatever for methane. But what happens is the knock-on effect is in 6 months' time, some regulation, some council says, oh, in line with the methane target,
yes.
no, you're not allowed to now do this, and now you've got to get this cattle off your land, or we've got to shut this down. The war on nitrogen in the soil, which is just a farce in Europe, has led to, we've seen the riots over the summer, we've seen farmers. It is a war against farmers, and unless the Nationals stand up and start responding to this. It is happening globally. It will happen in Australia. We've seen it in New Zealand this week. New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, James, got up and announced this whole raft of climate change stuff. No details, no details. Oh, we'll work out the details with the farmers in consultation.
Details.
Rubbish. Yeah. It's an attack. It's a climate change attack on the farmers of New Zealand, one of the great farming communities in the world. You are under siege. You are under attack. It will rip the guts out of your community, and it's coming here to Australia. Wake up, farmers.
But wake up everybody, because if you don't have farmers, you don't have cheap, available, good
and
food,
you end up with bugs on your
and
Big
it is
Mac.
A war. It's actually
let's do it
really,
again. 2 all dog patties. That's where this ends up.
No, but it is a war against, middle class prosperity.
Yes,
it is going to make people spend a much greater proportion of their budget on food, and it is going to lead to more dependence. It's going to lead to more government subsidies. You talk about the bugs, but it's also going to be about making more and more people dependent. And unable to feed themselves.
And steak will become exclusively for the very, very wealthy. You watch.
These green policies, they were implemented wholeheartedly across a wide range of sectors in Sri Lanka. Guess what happened? People were deprived of food. The farmers could not grow enough to feed their people, so there was an uprising. They went to the president's palace, the prime minister's palace. They had an uprising born out of the impact of these policies. That's an extreme example, but that's what can happen.
But Sri Lanka is a big, one of their big commodities is tea, so suddenly, you're not able to grow enough of this to export, then suddenly your economy collapses.
Exactly.
Yeah.